All right, we'll get started. So my name is Colt Blackmore. I'm the co-founder and CTO of Reach, and I'm joined here by...
I'm Geoff Belknap. I'm the Deputy CISO for Core and M&A at Microsoft.
And I'm Nicole Perlroth. I'm an investor, an advisor, and author of the book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. And I spent over a decade covering cybersecurity for the New York Times.
So Nicole, let's start with you. You mentioned your book, This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. It's, I would say, an excellent capstone to the decade starting with the 2010s. When I think of the 2010s, I think of Stuxnet, Dooku, and Flame, these massive state-sponsored cyber weapons based on zero-day exploitation techniques. And then toward the end of the decade, I think of the shadow brokers, which is maybe a group, maybe a single person, maybe foreign, maybe domestic. Lots of interesting things to talk about there. But they leaked NSA secrets, which were picked up by other attackers, then used in these massive, widespread attacks like WannaCry and NotPetya. WannaCry, a big ransomware attack that affected basically the entire world. It's one of the most expensive we've seen. And NotPetya, which is widespread, but we believe focused on Ukraine and probably not really a ransomware attack, was a state-level attack. Now, when we look at the attacks from the 2020s that have come up so far, the big ones, the ones that New York Times reporters write articles about. You think of SolarWinds, you think of Colonial Pipeline, more recently you think of United Health. What have you seen going from the previous decade to the current decade that's interesting in terms of a shift in the cybersecurity landscape? And then today, where should cybersecurity teams be focusing their attention, focusing their effort?
Yeah, so big question. I would say, I walked into the New York Times right when Stuxnet was getting discovered. And I walked out right after Colonial Pipeline and SolarWinds. And there was a through line, and the through line was that the attacks kept getting worse, definitely in terms of impact. The barrier to entry was getting lower and lower. As you mentioned, even nation-state tools, exploits, zero-day exploits, were leaked from the NSA and picked up by North Korea and Russia and cyber criminals to wreak all kinds of havoc. And increasingly, these attacks were coming for critical infrastructure, sectors like gas pipelines, like Colonial Pipeline, and also healthcare. And since I left the New York Times, really the bulk of the attacks that have made the national headlines are these ransomware attacks, like Change Healthcare, that have these third, fourth, fifth order effects. And I think what is frustrating, and part of the reason I left the New York Times was, at a certain point, it's very frustrating to be writing about a problem when there are solutions, but no one's using them. And increasingly, since I left the New York Times, the solutions are there. But in too many cases, it came down to, I don't want to say mismanagement, because I hate this era we're in of blame the victims. But it came down to managing your security estate has become nearly unsustainable for these security teams. And this was happening before the current decade, but you think back to the attacks I covered, like Target, the attack on their POS systems. It started with an HVAC supplier, but ultimately the attack was picked up by a FireEye alert, if I remember correctly, but it just didn't get caught. It's the ultimate signal noise problem. And we have added so many different tools and bells and whistles in security. All you need to do is go to the RSA conference every year to see just how many new shiny bells and whistles there are in this space, but we keep missing the basic things. And you go back to Colonial Pipeline. How did a cyber criminal group, it wasn't a nation state, it was a bumbling group of cyber criminals in a ransomware as a service attack, get into the biggest conduit for gas, oil, and jet fuel to the eastern seaboard? They got in because the poor company forgot to deactivate a former employee, and that employee's password had been stolen, was trading on the dark web, and they didn't have MFA properly installed. That's what it continues to come down to, is sort of these basic lapses. And to come back to like why we're all here and talk about reach a little bit, I think the problem, the fundamental problem, and I am not technical, I just covered these attacks and wrote about them for a living for a long time. But the fundamental problem is there's just too much noise. And fundamentally, we know complexity is the enemy of security. And we are asking humans who are already overworked, who are already inundated, to pick up these signals from more and more and more noise, and it's only getting worse with AI now. So how do we help them, I think, is probably the most urgent question that we face today. And we haven't been helping them. In fact, we've been, in some cases, watching some CISOs get prosecuted after major breaches and security lapses. And that's not the way out. The way out is, how do we make this simpler for them?
Yeah, if I can twist that a little bit, you could say security is complex, complexity is insecure, therefore security is insecure. And I definitely just exploded Geoff's brain.
I didn't expect there to be math or tautologies today, so I apologize. But yeah, security is insecure.
Right? Makes sense. Makes perfect sense. So I'm picking up really one theme from two different angles from what you're saying, Nicole. The theme is scale. On the attacker side, you have an increasing scale of the attacks. More attacks, broader attacks, attacks on more fundamental nodes of networks where the impacts are felt downstream in more places. Things like, that could be a supply chain attack, so that's the SolarWinds case, but also just critical, I would call healthcare critical infrastructure. So if you take down payment systems for months at a time, so people can't get prescriptions and things like the downstream impacts there are pretty significant. That's one form of scale. The other form of scale you mentioned is on the security team side. So folks like Geoff and the several teams you've had over the last 15 years, those teams have gotten bigger. The tools at their disposal have gotten more numerous. The level of complexity of operating those tools and actually getting value out of them has gone, well, the complexity has gone way up. The ability to do that effectively has gone down, I suppose. But if I were to give your CV, Geoff, I would say the last 15 years has been a series of escalations in terms of the scope of the companies you've been at and the scale at which you've operated. So I think Palantir was the first place where you were the be-all, end-all security decision maker, right, a CISO. Then there was there was Slack, there was LinkedIn, and now you're quite far up there at Microsoft. I can't really think of how your scope could get much bigger other than for somebody to put you in charge of the DoD at this point. It's quite large, so.
I'm
good. Same question I posed to Nicole. How have you seen things change over the arc of your career? And then today, what are the most pressing problems?
I think, honestly, the most startling thing is the stuff that hasn't changed, right? The job has largely stayed the same in that, and the way I think about it is, my job is to manage risk at these organizations through building capabilities, capacity, or efficiencies. The target of that, though, has moved a lot, right? So when we were, sort of at the beginning of this, back in the 2010s, we were worried about sort of like single points or sophisticated actors. And I think to Nicole's point earlier, it took a sophisticated actor to compromise infrastructure. That sophisticated actor had only so much capability to go to attack a target, so they had to use sophisticated means. And they had to pick somebody that was high value. What has really shifted over time is, while I and my teams are still busy sort of working on those three core problems, the actors have now decided, and I think correctly, that everything is infrastructure, and almost everything is critical infrastructure, especially if technology is attached. And now their capabilities have grown to the point where they don't have to pick a specifically exciting target. And a lot of times, smaller, less exciting targets help you build to a sort of jackpot. So I think where before, people in my position's job was to sort of look at what's the highest risk thing, what's the most likely black swan outcome, let's build towards that. Now, my job is effectively like a portfolio manager. I'm looking at, okay, I want to build a capability to do detection in this space, or I've got a good detection in this space, I want to expand the capacity of that detection. Or I got to decide, do I want to make the stuff that I have more efficient, more effective, less people, less money? How do I sort of like get really good at that thing? And to do that, I can no longer rely on point solutions. I have to look at what's the entire mix of all the money I'm spending, all the people that I'm investing, all the time that I'm putting into something, and make sure that the outcome is beneficial to the business. And I think the hardest thing there is that a lot of our world, kind of Nicole talked about RSA, is this constant bombardment of people selling a point solution, a thing to solve a problem. But a lot of times that problem doesn't really fit into what I'm working on. And a lot of the problems that we've seen for critical infrastructure providers come from basic things like auth or not understanding whether an identity has been turned off. That's not a point solution, that's operational. I've got to know, how do I invest to cover these sort of like mundane problems? And a lot of the wildest breaches are caused by the boringest, most unsexy problems you could imagine that you can't just spend your way out of. They take a lot of hard work and time. And I think in that way, the job hasn't changed. It's still to sort of do the boring, mundane work, but to find the most effective way to do that at scale.
And so how do you actually do? I love that you said, first of all, portfolio manager, because that's one of the ways I think about security. It is ultimately a quite large math problem. You can actually apply the same techniques that a high-frequency trader or just any kind of portfolio manager or wealth manager would apply to portfolio optimization to your security portfolio. You could do that. Some people probably do that. But strategically, tactically, from your point of view, in late 2024, going into 2025, what do you actually do? Like, how do you tackle this?
I think, and again, this is going to be a really uninspiring answer, but I think the best part of my education was I got a business education. So I'm not an engineer by training, although I spend a lot of time in engineering. And learning how to think about these problems and sort of like measure and take things that are subjective risks or subjective efforts that we're putting in from an engineering perspective and find a way to measure them objectively and assign sort of an operational value to them so that we can start to look at like, okay, so we invested all this money, these people, this effort, we built this thing. How do we think that's moved the needle in the area that we wanted it to, or did it move the needle in other areas? And I think really learning that, A, are we doing what we wanted to do? Do we drive the outcome that we want? How do we measure that? And when do we sort of hold off on investing there and move the investment of time, effort, and focus into a different area? And at the same time, how do we know that that's an area where we are either ahead of the actor or behind the actor? And I think it's the really magical part of this job that is fun is sort of going like, okay, where are actors headed next? What are they interested in? What does my business have to offer? If I'm running a pipeline, I know the core thing. But if I'm running a healthcare organization, maybe I don't quite understand, but I need to quickly understand, how could my infrastructure be used against someone else, if not just against my business? And think about, where do I need to invest to protect that? Because I'm either investing to protect my revenue, my customers, myself as an ongoing business, or, and I think this is really important, I need to invest to protect everybody else. My compromise could be used against the rest of the economy. That's not great for my customers or my investors, and it's not necessarily the top thing that people are thinking about today.
Do you feel like you're more reactive or proactive?
Well, I'll say every day I wake up and feel like I'm reactive, and I think the trick is to sort of figure out a way so that you can have more days that are proactive than reactive. I feel like that's the true win in this job.
And I mean, you mentioned, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I would essentially repeat back to you based on what I heard is, there are an awful lot of cybersecurity companies building an awful lot of different tools. All of them want you as a customer, which results in some degree of inundation of cold emails, maybe people finding you on the street, trying to flag you down, inviting you out for lunch, whatever form it takes. Does that feel like a net loss for your ability to do the job that you're trying to do? Or is there enough signal in that noise where, say, the juice is worth the squeeze? I'm mixing a lot of metaphors here. The juice is worth the squeeze to talk to these people, to see what they're about, to figure out which ones have value, how you can operationalize them and bring them into your team, versus just ignore every LinkedIn message you get?
Yeah, I think, I certainly have a lot of peers that do the latter and just try to ignore everything. And I definitely have those days where I want to rage on LinkedIn or Blue Sky or something about all the inundation. But the reality is, like, it is a part of my job to understand what's out there in the market. It is tricky to understand what I actually need at that time. And it's sort of, it is a honed skill to sort of weave through the messaging that's out there that is really sort of a shotgun approach in the most favorable sort of terms I can make it, of like, we're going to say all these words and hopefully that hooks you on something and we can have a conversation. But I think, when you find someone that really understands what your problem is and you can sort of find a solution, it's great. And let's be clear, you cannot solve these problems without your partners. You need partners to help you solve problems. Even in my current role, we buy outside products. Like, it's not just fully first party. We will buy something if that third party product really brings value to the solution. And we've done that. The challenge is understanding whether that third party solution adds more value than what you're doing today, or really, and I think in many ways, we probably spend a lot of time internally thinking about, can we use something we've already bought or something we've already built to have a bigger impact on a problem that we're having today that we just have missed? And I think you can spend as much time figuring that out as you can learning everything that's in the marketplace. And the reality is, both of those are daunting tasks. I think when you find something that can help you figure out where do you spend your energy, or answer the question of like, has spending my energy in this place been beneficial to me in the net for the business, then you've got a really special solution.
So there's a question for both of you. What advice do you give to the company with 5,000 employees and maybe 3 people on a security team?
A, you are underinvested in security. But B, focus on the things that are most important to you now. It can't be everything. You're going to have to just pick some place to start and roll up your sleeves and get to work. And, at some point, it will start to make sense.
I mean, I have a little bit of empathy. I mean, I have a lot of empathy, but I have a little bit of empathy for the Geoffs of the world in that when I was at the New York Times, I was getting DDoSed in my inbox every day by these new market entrants saying, write about us. We are going to fix this problem. Yes, probably Colt. So, and I had to set up blocks, in my Gmail for certain PR agencies, certain marketing people, because it was just too much. And I was just a journalist. Imagine if you're actually trying to solve this problem. And another thing I would just point out is the sophisticated attackers are really moving towards, the lowest common denominators, the companies you just mentioned, the people that are understaffed, under-resourced, what I call sort of the linchpins of various industries, sort of like the Change Healthcares, the Colonial Pipelines, the MEDOCs in Ukraine. And we have to start thinking about those people in the ecosystem and thinking about how we partner to help secure them. The other thing is the attackers are going to a place where they're trying to create as little noise as possible. So some of the big attacks we've been talking about recently are the Volt Typhoon attacks, right? Where they're not using malware, they're conducting these living off the land attacks. In a lot of cases, they're coming in through home routers. Why would anyone flag as suspicious traffic from some home router in Indianapolis? And they're coming in and they're acting just like any admin would. So suddenly we're not looking for, the malware anymore. We're looking at this from a completely different perspective that really requires you to be in a position where you're limiting the white noise so you can pick up the signal. And the more tools you add, the more noise you get. And the harder it is to find the signal in the noise. We're in the ultimate, talk about mixed analogies here, but losing the forest for the trees moment in security. And over again, it keeps coming back to, Colonial Pipeline and a lack of MFA or a lack of deprovisioning. A failure to pick up the one FireEye alert because of, the timing didn't work out for your security team and you had so much other noise. being created. And so we really have to kind of come back to this and think about, how do we just turn the whole problem on its head? How do we basically use these tools effectively so that we can pick up that one signal, and we stop thinking of CISOs as someone who can prevent these attacks, but almost like a business continuity officer, that the minute it happens, all systems are designed to basically prevent the blast radius from getting bigger and bigger. And that's a really hard task. And so we have to start thinking about, like, how do we create tools, not to get all loosey-goosey woo-woo here, but how do we create tools that are empathetic towards this job description, which has become fundamentally unsustainable?
Yeah, that actually reminds me of, I don't know if you might know Robert Morris Jr., but Robert Morris Sr., his dad, was at one time the chief scientist of the NSA, among other things, worked at Bell Labs before that, a long time ago, when that was a pretty cool job to have had. He, long after he retired, he gave a speech where he calls out what he calls the 3 golden rules of security. Maybe you're familiar with them, but essentially it's don't own a computer, don't turn it on, and don't use it. And my translation of what you're saying is, this applies to what you said as well, Geoff. The point of a business is to do business. If the point of a business was to be secured, that's a trivial problem to solve. You turn off everybody's computers or take the computers away. Don't let them talk on the phone because they might get social engineered. You just shut the business down and then the business is safe, but that's not why we do things. People can get into car accidents, but we don't pull everybody off the road. It's a process of weighing costs and benefits and mitigating risk in the right ways to still allow people to go on about their lives and live, or businesses to go on about their business. It seems a very relevant, perspective when you're thinking of cybersecurity, not for individual people, because if you're just a person at home being targeted, that's one thing. But for you can be as strict with yourself as you like. That's easy. But if you're a business, you're trying to do things, then of course you need to balance those 2 things, right? Cost and benefit. Yes, or did I completely misrepresent you?
Yes, no, that was a good summation.
Yeah. No notes. I think the thing we forget sometimes is the job is not to make the business as secure as it can be. It's to make it as secure as it needs to be. To be successful in whatever it's choosing to do cannot be 100% security. You cannot prevent 100% of everything. You have to take some risks to operate in business. Otherwise, there's no point in what you're doing. And even if you're not running a for-profit business, if you're running healthcare or an NGO or something like that, you've got to make some hard decisions about that. And I think that's where, my job is hard, right? I can tell everybody to turn their computers off, problem solved, I can go home. But that's not the world we live in.
I know Garrett is interested in hearing hot takes, so maybe I'll just ask you guys what your hottest takes are.
We sort of talked about earlier, if you are a small security team and you're just getting started, what do you focus on? My real advice there is, don't start on the most advanced, sophisticated threat you could imagine. Don't go buy a threat intelligence feed. Go start in your identity system. Go see if everybody's got 2FA. Go look at how you're patching everything. How often are you patching everything? How are you managing your SaaS applications? Those are the things that are not exciting. They're not the things with the 50 by 50 foot boots at RSA, but that is the #1 place where your investment is going to take you the furthest. And it's not the thing that everybody is going to invite you to a party in Vegas to talk about.
Fair. So the important things are not the things that people are trying to sell you.
A lot of times the most important things are table stakes, and nobody really wants to market to you about table stakes.
Fair. Cool.
I mean, my hot take is I'm just all out of hot takes. I was just writing hot takes for more than a decade, and I'm just tired. My hot take is I'm tired. I'm tired of seeing the same attacks play out over and over again, like I said, with maybe a slight escalation in the technique or the targeting. I'm tired that everyone's sort of been doing business as usual for too long. I'm tired in that we're like diving headfirst into AI making a lot of the mistakes that we made in sort of the last new generation of technology, and not thinking about where we might want to pause and do things differently. It's like a Cassandra time for me. I wrote my book about zero-day exploits and the zero-day exploit market, and all of those issues are about to become exponentially worse with AI. I wrote a book about the human moral calculus that goes into developing a zero-day exploit, and who do you sell it to, who do you not sell it to. Now it's not really a human question anymore, because I'm already seeing tools out there that can find and develop and weaponize zero-day exploits. So we're entering a whole new era, but we still haven't answered sort of the fundamental issues around cybersecurity, to Geoff's point. And I think, it's time to just do sort of a basic rethinking and a basic almost census, to come back to this point about, our attackers, our adversaries are looking for the lowest common denominators in our society, at every level, whether it's, which is the supplier or company, or like SolarWinds, or, part of the healthcare ecosystem like Change Healthcare, that if targeted could bring down the whole thing. They're looking there, but we haven't changed our thinking around this. We're still talking about sort of like a certain flavor of attack without looking at everything we touch, all of our third-party risk, and asking like, what is the most likely of these to be compromised that could get me? And how do I help that entity secure themselves? Because their security could mean the difference of whether I'm secure and my customers are secure. So it's not, to Geoff's earlier point, it's almost not even a security question. It's really like a business or like census question. And, I think, yes, there will always be a new mousetrap on the market, but I do think we are at this like very rare inflection point, especially with AI, where it's time to just think about how we're fundamentally addressing this issue, and whether there are different tacks to take here.
Okay, so AI, big risk, and then general thinking a decade or more maybe behind where it should be. Like we're making decisions today based on data we're just coming to understand that's maybe 5, 10, 15 years out of date. Sound fair?
Yeah, fair.
That definitely makes sense to me. I mean, I think a lot about even just 10 years ago, what the world looked like. Do you remember what the most popular browser in businesses was 10 years ago?
Internet Explorer.
Internet Explorer. There were years where the team I was on at Palo Alto Networks found 100 plus remote code execution exploits in a single year, right? For Internet Explorer, doesn't exist anymore. But it's one of the biggest sources of exploits. Remember what YouTube ran on? No. Flash. You guys remember Flash? Incredibly exploitable, even in Chrome, but it's gone now, thanks to Apple putting their foot down. This is a big change that's happened in the last 10 years. Do you remember how you used to read PDFs? It wasn't in your browser. It was in a standalone application, usually Adobe Acrobat Reader, incredibly exploitable. There's all kinds of fancy encoding, decoding, content playing, videos embedded, JavaScript, all kinds of stuff going on in there. Now it just opens in Chrome or Firefox or something. Not very exploitable anymore. And then Microsoft Office, actually, big chunks of it used to be from source code that had been lost years before. And so when an exploit was found, they had to patch the generated machine code directly because they couldn't recompile the source. And they've rewritten all of that now, so those holes are mostly closed as well. The exploitable computing surface 10 years ago was massive, even on individual users. So that's before we even get into Log4j or Apache Struts or any of these big ones that just sit out there sometimes. It was massive, even for individual users, and today it's just not. But you do still see companies invest a disproportionate amount of time, money, energy into vulnerability management, which I'm not saying isn't important. It's very important, but I think the marginal value in an economic sense of investing more and more and more in that is probably close to zero, like asymptotically zero, I would say. And it's rooted in thinking that's, I'd say, roughly 10 years out of date, just to give one concrete example.
Well, and I hope, that is the great promise of AI and security, is maybe we can start writing more secure code, before we start shipping it into millions of people's hands, or we're relying on bug bounty programs and sort of people's own curiosity to come to us with these errors in the code. Maybe actually we could start at a much higher bar. And that is one amazing potential use case.
Yeah, I would say today AI poses a risk for writing less secure software, but perhaps that future does exist. I am curious about, you mentioned AI specifically for, let's call it automated vulnerability discovery. And there have been tools around, like fuzzing tools, for example, that did this for a long time. A lot of the Internet Explorer vulnerabilities were found by automated tooling, which was very effective. Now you have theoretically much more powerful tools that are available that can be used to do this. There were things like DARPA challenge, I want to say around 2014, 2015. There was actually discovery, fix, compile, deploy the update, all AI driven before we even got to LLMs, which was kind of cool to see. So I guess on a scale of 1 to 10 AI risk, where would you put it today?
I want to hear Geoff answer this
How scared
question
should we be?
first.
First of all, it's cheating to make me go first. I think right now, AI is not a risk for the average human. I think where AI is a risk is at my level, it rapidly increases the sophistication with which an attacker can execute at their sort of economic level. So if I'm a college kid somewhere in sort of Eastern Europe, I have access to much more powerful tools now, and AI might make them much more powerful. It might enhance that execution. And it might help them find where they can execute an attack much more effectively. I think the benefit, though, for people like me is AI can also be put to use, like you said, finding bugs, fixing bugs, predicting where I need to put resources on problems ahead of time. I think one of the things I was just thinking about while you were talking was, it used to be, we used to tell people, you have to install some sort of endpoint security software, like buckle your seatbelt. The rest is up to you. We're not going to do anything. And then we figured out, well, we need to make cars more safe. We need, add crumple zones and airbags and things like that. So it's not just up to the operator. I think we've gotten to a point now where we can use AI on the defensive side to help make software more safe, to eliminate classes of bugs. But I think, because it's both in the defender's hand and in the threat actor's hand, from my perspective, I guess my hot take here is, I don't think it matters. I think where it really impacts people is if you've convinced yourself that you've done enough and that this basic problem you need to solve is 5 years away, well, now it's 0 years away. Like, you don't have the ability to stop and wait to do something you're going to invest in. You have to keep doing those things now.
We heard Geoff on AI, but you're the one who raised AI as a concern.
Yeah, I wanted to bury my head in the sand. I had my baby daughter the month almost that ChatGPT was released, and I was like, I'm just going to go into this maternity leave and not look around for a little while. And now here I am, and I think, like most things, this will be this sort of arms race in a way. And I think so far what we've seen is AI augmented attacks, better phishing emails, that kind of a thing. Can we see it help defenders? There's huge promise there. What I worry about most is like what we call the target-rich cyber poor among us. These linchpins in various sectors that aren't well resourced or that would be calamitous if they were attacked. Like water treatment facilities. I always make a point when I see like a major water treatment facility to stop my car and ask myself, like, how many IT people probably work at this water treatment facility? And I assume 0. They probably work with a contractor. And it's like, those are the targets I worry about most. And that's also where we know a lot of our adversaries are now focused, like the Bolt Typhoon threat actor. So, where will it net out? I don't know. But, it comes back to, may you live in interesting times. We are certainly living in interesting times.
I mean, if you could dictate what any of the security teams in charge of these resources would do, it doesn't even have to be a concrete thing with a specific product or product category, just what they should be prioritizing conceptually, strategically, given the concerns that you're talking about, what would it be?
I mean, that's a question for you because you were in this role, and I wasn't. But I think what I hear over and over again when I do sort of these board engagements, et cetera, is, 6 years ago, a CIO or CISO could tell their board, so long as we have some sort of endpoint solution, as long as we have MFA switched on, some kind of intrusion detection system, we'll be able to catch 99.9% of attacks. And after SolarWinds, I can't say that anymore. Suddenly, every SaaS application, every third party, every employee is a potential patient zero for an attack. And managing that is extremely difficult and almost borderline feels impossible. And so where do we begin, I think, is the question. And I think, that's where I would like to hear your answer on this. Because right now, if you ask the security industry, where do you begin? It's, well, if only you buy my thing, you'll be able to solve this problem. And we all know that's not true. If just the one thing was going to be able to solve, or one technology was going to be able to solve this problem, it would have been solved 20 years ago. But the issue is that we're getting hit by so many different attack vectors. I mean, we really are in the most complex digital threat landscape we've ever been in. And people keep getting in through the low-hanging stuff. So how do we bring the noise level down? How do we catch the needle in the haystack? And that I think is a great question for you, is, why are you doing what you're doing? Why is this your concentration?
Yeah, I can certainly attempt to answer it. I'm not sure how clearly I can articulate the full thing, but I can start with an analogy. In the early 1980s, an economist named Amartya Sen published a book. You may have heard of it. The title is Poverty and Famine. It's fairly well known within economics. He won the Nobel for it and other things about 20 years later. One of the core questions of Sen's was, why do famines happen? What causes famines? How do famines occur? And you might naively think famine is an extreme food shortage, and a food shortage is caused by a shortage of food, and it's not terribly complicated, and that's the end of the discussion. But in fact, what he found is the availability of food has almost nothing to do with famines systemically. So, for example, one of the best tools we have today now, based on research that Sen and others have done, when a famine is occurring somewhere in the world, we can go in and alleviate the pressure, not by bringing food, but by bringing money, because famines are so often caused by some degree of economic dysfunction, and you can very often unlock the things that economic dysfunction locks up by injecting cash into a specific market, which I think is quite interesting. So, I mean, you hear military historians often talk about, armies don't win wars, logistics win wars. And I think cybersecurity is in a similar place today. It's easy to misunderstand what the problems are, in the same way that it's easy to misunderstand the causes of famine. If you ask most cybersecurity companies, if you ask the markets, investors, or public or private investors, if you ask even the customers in a lot of cases, what are the big problems, what are the causes, a lot of people tell you it's a technology problem. We don't have enough technology, we need to produce more technology, we need to find ways to to get this in people's hands. And the getting it in people's hands part is true, but the production part is not really true, just like producing more food doesn't fix famine. It's a distribution, logistics problem, fundamentally. And so we have the same challenge in the world of cybersecurity, and it's useful to acknowledge that, hey, we actually have a lot of great armies. CrowdStrike is an army, Sentinel-1 is an army, Microsoft Defender for Endpoint is an army, Cortex XDR is an army. They're all great. These are fantastic tools that all play in the same space, right? These are endpoint security products. Pick any of those or the other 5 or 6 from the top 10 products, and you will actually be okay. Everybody is doing a pretty great job at a technological level. What we're missing is the logistics, the operationalization. So the point of creating Reach and what we do here is to undo a lot of the damage that I think cybersecurity companies have inflicted on cybersecurity teams. What I often say to people is, cybersecurity companies are a denial of service attack on cybersecurity teams. They all want you to buy their product, and they're going to hit you over the head with the reasons why their product is different than everybody else's. Inevitably, that will be a discussion about technology, and it's largely a big waste of time. You could pick any of the top 5 or 10 products in any category, basically at random, doesn't matter which. Focus on getting really good at it, and that is how you solve your problems. It's like going to the store, buying spaghetti sauce. Doesn't really matter what brand you buy. All of the important stuff happens on the stove, right? It's the chef much more than it is the ingredients. So what we do at Reach is essentially say, you have probably basically everything that you already need. We are going to analyze all of your data and show you how to be really, really good at using it, get all of the value out of it that you can before you even think about going and buying your 30th or 40th tool. That's the general gist.
And at these Fortune 500 companies, it's not your 30th tool, it's your 80th tool.
I wish it was 80 tools.
Wow, yeah.
I think this is a great point because I think, just coming back to it, you don't end a war with a bullet or a bomb. You don't end a famine with a pizza or by opening up a restaurant. These are systemic issues. They're endemic. And I think we are right on the cusp in cybersecurity of transitioning to understand that. Today, there are still boards and there are still executive leadership teams that look at IT and go, okay, InfoSec is a specialized version of IT. So a CIO will hire some CISO, some whiz kid that'll understand these issues, they'll buy the right thing, problem solved, we can move on to selling widgets. And I think, if you had a systemic issue with finance, like we had in this country a couple of decades ago, you go, okay, we need to take finance and fiscal reporting seriously. It needs to become the fabric of the company and how our customers or our investors trust us. I think now we're just about, and we really need to accelerate the movement of that to cybersecurity. It is not a specialized technology thing. It is a part of the business. And your business is not going to survive if you don't treat your technology and securing your business as an essential part of that business, of how you grow it. As much as how you treat marketing and sales, it's how you should be thinking about how you're going to protect what you've built. And I think you have to understand that that doesn't come from buying a thing. It comes from understanding that systemically, security has got to be part of everything that you do. And I think what we're going to see is, over the next 10, 15 years, the companies that survive are going to be the companies that really understand that and understand how to bring to bear tools and solutions to problems that take that into account.
All right, that's going to be a wrap for us. Geoff, Nicole, thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. It's been fun.
All right, I'll see you later.